we're going to talk about oceans and hopefully give you some hope about the future of oceans given climate change and all the stress that we know it puts on the ocean. So Sarah, as NOAA's chief scientist, I know you think about the ocean all the time, both its impact on climate and the weather, but also on fisheries and all of the ocean economy that's built up around the ocean. So one of the things here in South Florida and all around the world that we know is taking a beating because of climate change is coral reefs. We saw last year ocean temperatures soar, particularly here in South Florida, 100 degrees or more in the water, unprecedented, and we know how hard that is on corals. But we also know there are some corals that are more heat resistant. We know there are efforts to restore coral reefs. And we know there's an awful lot of science going into this because they're so important to the ocean, both the economy around the ocean and tourism, but also for fisheries and food. So tell us how we can feel hopeful about the future given the stress that coral reefs and the ocean in general is under from climate change.
Yeah, so first the facts. According to NOAA's Physical Science Laboratory, over 40% of the ocean was in a marine heat wave this past year. A marine heat wave is defined as above 10% of the average in the distribution, and so we had never hit that large amount worldwide. It was caused by a combination of climate change, but also the El Nino that developed. So we saw this around the world, and usually during El Ninos, we see coral bleaching events. And in the Florida Keys, we saw major amounts of coral bleaching. And these are all pictures that we have from all the different sites that NOAA takes across corals around the world. So we saw these bleaching events, and when we just did our survey of Florida, we found in many locations that only 20% of stag corals were alive. The bleaching event really has taken its toll. And that's the depressing part. But on the positive side, we can manage what is happening. The incredible science that's happening here in South Florida and at NOAA is around understanding the corals, understanding why that happens, but also increasingly, we know how to grow corals. We actually, not far from here on Key Biscayne, we have a facility where we grow corals, where we're able to separate them, we're able to understand which ones are strong, which ones are hardy, what makes them grow well, what doesn't. And with that, we have the knowledge about how do we conserve those coral species, and then also when we need to and we go out and we restore coral reefs, how do you do so in a way that is then also hardy for the decades to come? And climate change is going to continue. We're on this march until we reach net zero emissions. But we know what the future holds in terms of temperatures in the atmosphere and temperatures in the ocean. And so we can plan for that as we do the restorations of these coral reefs in Florida and around the world to make them hardier for the future.
Well, and I'm so impressed with the people who are working on this every day, who are restoring corals. There's a great company called Coral Vita. I know Sam's been here talking, he'll be on the main stage, I think, later. And then you go places like in the Red Sea and you see corals that are still thriving even in those high heat conditions. So
yeah, the Red Sea corals are really special corals that they're like the hardy, warm corals of the world. I wanted to ask you, the coral reefs are such an important habitat for fish and marine species. Can we zoom out and talk about how fish stocks are being affected around the world from environment and human stress causes? And also, how is this impacting food security, and what can the international community do action? She used to lead our negotiations and work on biodiversity around the world for State Department and saw firsthand in the last few years how this plays out.
It is an incredibly important problem for us to really face head on. As we think about climate and how it's stressing the oceans, fisheries are moving all over the place in order to adjust and adapt to the heat conditions that we've just talked about. And so this is where my background as a lawyer comes in. Governance matters. We have to have good governance and flexible governance that can adapt with the conditions. So it's wonderful that in the US, at NOAA, the very agency that predicts climate, that understands the climate, the forces in the ocean that are causing these changes to happen, is also the one that regulates commercial fishing. So it's a perfect place for us to do the very best we can at managing. And that may mean shifting our management regimes. It also means new technology and thinking about species that might be able to exist in new places. Things like, creating the Billion Oyster Project in New York, or thinking about how many people's livelihoods are impacted by this. Over half the people on the planet rely on fish for some source of protein, and 600 million people rely on it as a part of their income generation. So we know that we have to take those management steps that are crucial to conserving fish stocks in the face of the other changes that we're seeing. Not to mention cutting back on pollution and doing all the other things we can, like creating marine protected areas, in order to make sure that we have enough fish to feed the planet. So, Sarah, now it's my turn to ask you again. Tell us a little bit about all the things that NOAA is working on to help us understand the ocean better. There is so much of the planet. You know, there's this old saying about how we know more about the moon than we know about the ocean, and it's our own home here on Earth. It's our planet, and we don't know so much about it. We're always discovering new species, which is an amazing thing that there's still so much out there to discover. Tell us about NOAA's exploration efforts and all the things that we know could be helping us in the future, like new things that we discover that might lead to better medicines or other kinds of advancements.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, NOAA in our ocean purview, we are going from the bottom of the ocean, mapping the seafloor, all the way to the top of the ocean, and understanding what's all in between. And so with that, we have new technologies to be able to collect as much information as possible. Historically, we would send down cameras or look down at the bottom, or we would do fish catches to be able to count the number of fish and then dissect them and see how healthy they are. But increasingly, we're doing less invasive technologies as well. We have omics, which we're taking measurements out of the seawater. When I was over at our laboratory yesterday, they were showing me how now Rice's whale, this whale that is very rare, it's hard to find, we're actually able to take seawater, take a vial of seawater this large and be able to determine if Rice's whale was recently there. And so we're able to know the range of this animal. And it's in this early infancy, but I'm really excited about the expansion of eDNA, like capturing that seawater and figuring out what species were in it, because it allows us to know in remote locations what's there, particularly when you have these types of whales or other species that are otherwise really hard to spot. And actually, on the West Coast, using these vials of water, we're able to replicate those traditional surveys where we catch all the fish for hake. And that's the first time we've been able to do it for any species. And so I'm really excited about the development of that type of technology, which will allow us to know what's happening around the world. And it's also low cost. Taking a vial this small of water, it can be done around the world by many different people without sophisticated, fancy PhDs. You can do it in many of these regions where we're trying to.
It's so hard to count fish. People think it's such back to the fisheries question. You know, we're always struggling with how to manage these fish stocks that move around all the time. They don't stand still and let us count them. So. And this is amazing.
And we can do it with the DNA, and now increasingly we can also do it with acoustics. So if you actually we have microphones all over the ocean where we can listen in, and we can also increasingly use those acoustic sensors to know, is there a large tuna school going by? Where are the whales? What is going on? And this explosion of data and the use of AI to then sift through it is really exciting, because it's going to give us so much more information than we've had historically.
Well, we've had great discussions here this week about the future of aquaculture and the new technologies that are available on that as well. And there's a whole lot of reason to think that the blue economy is one that can be both sustainable and really grow in the future.
Yeah. We sit in the Department of Commerce at NOAA, and we're doing analysis with commerce on what is the future of this. And we see growth in the blue economy going forward as people turn to it, because 17% of the world's proteins come from fish. It is a critical source, and we see the ability for that to grow. particularly when you have droughts or heat waves on land, it is the insurance policy is having the ocean and using the ocean effectively when things aren't going as well on land due to climate variability and change. I wanted to shift on that important point, though, to protecting species to you. There's a new global treaty that was just negotiated to allow countries of the world for the first time to create marine protected areas. These are marine parks on the high seas. Why is this important, and how much more of the ocean do we need to protect, and how are we going to get there?
This is such an exciting topic to me, having worked hard at the United Nations to help negotiate this important agreement. So 70% of the planet is ocean. I'll geek out here a little bit on statistics. Over 50%, or almost 50%, of the planet is the high seas, which is the areas in the ocean that are beyond national jurisdiction, where there hadn't been a lot of governance before, and it was very sectoral, very kind of chaotic and disorganized. If you were a shipper, you were covered by certain rules. If you're in fishing on the high seas, you had certain areas that were regulated well. But the rest was just the wild, wild west. And we really need to be protecting a lot of the planet. Another global treaty has been agreed by every country in the world, which is hard to get that kind of agreement, that we're going to protect 30% of the planet by 2030. We're going to try, because that's what scientists tell us we need in order to have a healthy, functioning planet that will provide all the things that we need from nature. So in order to protect 30% of the planet, you have to be able to get to that 50% that's out there beyond law. And this is the first time the countries of the world, again, all got together and said, we want to be able to protect areas as parks out there in the high seas. So right now, only 1% of that area is fully protected, and it's in Antarctica, where we already had a global agreement to protect, and it was very hard to get those protections put in place. So now we have the potential to actually protect that part of the high seas where we know if we don't mine it, drill it, fish it, pollute it, that it can withstand an awful lot of the beating that climate change is taking on those parts of the ocean. So for now, we really need to find ways to get global agreement to actually put some of those places aside. And this agreement, for the first time, gives us the opportunity to do that. And it was really an amazing thing. We had been negotiating it, the US and all the countries in the world had been negotiating it for over 10 years. And it got to a critical point last February and March. And the negotiators actually negotiated for nearly 2 days straight without a break in order to be able to reach this agreement. And it was fascinating how countries came together at the end, even with their reservations about kind of losing sovereignty and whether they could actually get benefits from all that marine biodiversity. The other big part of the treaty is that it governs how we use biodiversity that's gathered from the high seas, that theoretically belongs to everyone on the planet, how we use that and how we all benefit from that marine genetic diversity and all the discoveries that might come from it. So this agreement couldn't be more important, and it couldn't come at a more important time. And now, hopefully, we'll get enough countries to ratify it in the next year, and 2 already have, which is great, but we need about 60 to ratify it in order for it to go into effect. So hopefully, in the next year or so, we'll see that treaty go into effect, and already countries are working together to try to identify the most important parts of the high seas to protect for climate and for fisheries and all the other things that we need from the ocean. So it's a very exciting moment, and I was just thrilled to be a part of it. And we had an incredible US negotiating team, but lots of countries leaned in. So I think, you know, if we had to sum it up, Sarah, I think about the ocean as having so much potential, and I know our former NOAA administrator always says it's too big to ignore and it's too big to let fail. I know that's what you all are focused on every day at NOAA, and I have a lot of hope. I don't know if you feel the same way about the future of the ocean.
Oh, exactly. I say the facts. I say the facts of, like, this is what we face and this is what we see. The thing that I always say is, with that science and information, we know what the future holds. There's not a lot of things, your relationships, politics, society, that we actually have quite a lot of certainty of what the world looks like in the coming years. And so we have to take that information, that crystal ball, and we have to use it. And we know how to use it to create a sustainable ocean, to create and maintain biodiversity and how to conserve, to be able to make a hardy ocean and a healthy ocean for years to come.
There are no ocean solutions without climate solutions, and there are no climate solutions without ocean solutions. So it's been a great conversation. Thanks, Sarah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.